Is this on?
And before you start, Bullen, I just wanted to acknowledge the presence of two senators I didn't mention before, Senator Fuller and Senator Ben Allen. Thank you. Please
Thank you.
proceed.
Good afternoon. Chair Pavley, senators, committee staff, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for the opportunity to come before you and talk about the SB4 regulations that have been developed only in part while I have been here, but it's been a pretty active development period. And I'm going to spend time not talking about what the interim regulations are about, because I want to spend time looking at the permanent regulations that will go into effect July 1. Many of the interim regulations are not terribly dissimilar from the permanent regulations, but there are additions in the permanent regulations that I want to go over. Essentially, what I'd like to do is review the permanent regulations in a way that talks about what's going to happen before well stimulation treatment, and then during, and then after. There's an extensive amount of information that will be gathered and reviewed and evaluated as part of the permitting process before anyone can stimulate a well. Most of these wells, in fact, almost all of the wells that are being stimulated currently in the state are new wells. So even though our permanent regulations are not in place, the new wells undergo a rigorous permitting process and then a rigorous inspection process. So all kinds of inspections around new wells and so forth are already in place, and our inspectors are active in the field. But there are the permanent regulations that will be enacted on July 1 involve understanding the quality of the cement, understanding and its testing, so that we're confident that the various casings that are cemented to surface and then down in those that aren't cemented to surface can withstand the pressures of hydraulic fracturing. There is extensive pressure testing of the equipment, of the well bore, to make sure that it's actually 100%, 120% of the stimulation pressure, to make sure that the fluids will be confined in the well bore. The preponderance of problems that have occurred from hydraulic fracturing occur with failure of the well bores. So therefore, there's a fair amount of rigorous testing that goes on. It's also tested again by the service companies, which do a pressure testing of the well and its full equipment as part of the stimulation process. And that's mostly for safety, but it actually provides the division with an opportunity to have another set of pressure tests before the stimulation actually begins. There will be analysis of the well stimulation treatment area. What does that mean? What it means is, one of the things that we are most concerned about is confining the fluids of the hydraulic fracturing to a zone that we anticipate and expect to occur. The subsurface is a difficult place to work, and you have to be very careful about what you do down there. And so geology can confine fluids to zone. The fact that we even have oil and gas reservoirs tells you that geology can hold fluids in large volumes for very large periods of time. So you're looking at the geology to understand, are there formations there that will allow the fluids to be confined to zone? Is there evidence of any sort of faulting that we can see? And we can actually ask for quite a bit of information from the industry to confirm that. We look at old wells. We look at the well casing diagrams and so forth to make sure there are no conduits by which hydraulic fracturing fluids can get someplace that we don't want them to be. We also look at the well stimulation treatment design. So the engineers will design a volume that they wish to stimulate. That is a volume of rock through which the fractures they hope are going to develop. On that basis, they calculate the amount of volume and fluids that they need and so forth. We actually are going to require that they give us information about the modeling techniques that they use. We're in contact with those who actually do a lot of this kind of modeling, including at the National Laboratories. Nuclear security is part of that. So we understand what the quality of that analysis is. Again, all around understanding the volume of stimulation and keeping the fluids within zone. Neighbors will be notified. That is, they will be notified with enough time so that they can be apprised of their rights to have water testing of their wells before, during, and after a stimulation paid for by the companies. And I'll have a little bit more to say about that. There's a groundwater monitoring program that by the time the well is stimulated must be in place. This is a monitoring program that the operators develop, and Dogger works with the water board in close cooperation to approve this groundwater monitoring plan so that we have the ability to test water over the period and after well stimulation so that we know we don't see signs of the hydraulic fracturing fluid showing up in places that we don't want it to. These groundwater monitoring plans must be signed off on by the water board before the well stimulation can take place, and Jonathan will speak to that. Chemical disclosures. The companies are required to disclose to us all chemicals that are used and their volumes prior to the well stimulation. So in their design, they have to tell us what they're going to use. They then have to tell us what they actually used, and so that we can compare what they think they're going to use with what they actually use. There will be an acid volume threshold calculation done. That is, there is in the legislation a distinction between fluids that are put down a well for well maintenance and fluids that are put down in the well for stimulation. And that's not a simple calculation, but it's not that hard either. But it allows us to distinguish what is routine well maintenance and well clean-out activities from a formation stimulation activity. Water management plans must be in place. That is, we will know where the water comes from, and by the way, most of the water, about 80% of the water used in the state right now for hydraulic fracturing comes from the aqueduct via the connection of ERA's operation, where a huge amount of the hydraulic fracturing is, to the Bell Ridge Water District, which gets its water from the aqueduct. The groundwater monitoring plan, we will know where the water came from, we will know how much water comes back, and we will know where that water goes. Also, there's extensive information sharing between and among the agencies that are responsible for all aspects of regulation of hydraulic fracturing. So that all goes into the effort to actually giving a permit and allowing somebody to stimulate a well beginning July 1st. During the well stimulation treatments, the well stimulation activities, the well pressures will be monitored. And how the well pressure behaves gives you a lot of idea about what if something is going wrong. And we will have access to the pressures that are exerted by the pumps during hydraulic fracturing. And you actually, I've seen many of these jobs done, and you can tell right away when something goes wrong. So we'll see those pressure time plots, and we'll know whether the fracture went according to plan or not. We are the only state in the nation to have a seismic monitoring requirement for hydraulic fracturing for well stimulation. There's really two reasons for this. There's a seismic safety reason, and there's also a reason that relates to keeping the fluids within zone. It is known in the literature and from experience by oil operators that they can intersect small, small faults, not those that are going to generate a tectonic earthquake that can be felt, but those that can generate small earthquakes that are below the threshold for feeling. And depending on the geology and where you are, it's around magnitude 3.0. But what those do signify, though, is if you happen to have a string of small earthquakes, it registers that you may actually be stimulating that fault with the fluids, and therefore the fluids can get out of zone. We want to know about that. So we're requiring operators to monitor the California Integrated Seismic Network. The state is very fortunate in having a very robust seismic network. And then if they see an earthquake of magnitude 2.7 or greater, they have to stop, and we need to do a geologic review. So it's seismic safety, and it's keeping fluids within zone. In addition, the operator must provide the division an opportunity to witness well stimulation. And so there's a 72-hour notice and then a 3-hour notice that confirms the timing of the well stimulation so that the division can have staff on site for oversight of the well stimulation event. After well stimulation, there's a considerable amount of reporting that's required. There's monitoring after the well stimulation treatment. There's ongoing monitoring of well pressures. There's ongoing monitoring of the annular pressures. That's the space between the casings and the rock through which the well is drilled. Production pressures have to be checked every 2 days for the first 30 days and then monthly thereafter. And there has to be a report on annular pressures, as I just discussed. Post-well stimulation disclosures are provided to the division within 60 days, where the operator tells us all that went on and closes out the well stimulation activity information about chemicals, where the water went, all these things, of what actually happened during the event. No plan survives its collision with reality, and there are going to be adjustments that the division wants to know about. And those are required to be reported. And then a post-well stimulation report. And then there's monitoring of the production pressure during the course of the production of the well. So there's a very robust set of activities that the division is primarily responsible for. Other agencies with whom we work cooperatively are also responsible, so that we understand what happens thoroughly during a well stimulation event. And we'll have all of those data on the website for everyone to see. I think, you know, transparency is something that I've always brought in all the leadership positions that I've had, and this one, of course, will be no different. In fact, it's actually vital for the division. So who receives a notice? Those who live within 1,500 feet of the wellhead all receive notice of that there will be a well stimulation in that vicinity. They will be notified of their rights to have water testing done at operator expense. And then if the well is directional, that is, it goes down and then slants off in a certain direction, within 500 feet of the surface trace of where that well goes, notifications will be made there. They're required to be done in advance, 30 days in advance, and will accompany what their rights are as neighbors to this activity. I'm going to cover this very briefly because Jane actually covered some of this already. Where's the action? Well, the action is indicated by the notices and the disclosures that we have received. And you can see here in this table that through January 31st of this year, we had received the preponderance of notices in Kern County, over 99%, and then a handful of wells, of notices for the intent to drill a well in other counties. The disclosures that we've received, remember there's a big discrepancy between the number of disclosures that we receive and the number of notices that we get, because when a notice is given, operators have a year to drill their well. So when a notice is approved, they have a year. And so the disclosures may come up to a period of time after that year. So there's a considerable lag between the time when we receive the disclosures and when the notice is given.
determines whether you give a disclosure or notice as a well?
Well, whether the division is satisfied that its regulations that are in place and the interim regulations are satisfied. So in other words, we collect information and then we would permit the well based on current regulations around permitting a new well and the interim regulations around a well stimulation. So and that can take some time. I mean, there's some back and forth. We got to get the companies to give us the right data. Sometimes because
So
of
it's
the
almost like getting TSA pre-check, where you get to ask questions, you know, ask for permission after, ask for forgiveness rather than ask for permission.
No, I wouldn't say that. No, I wouldn't
I know, it's-
characterize it that way. It is part of the division's permitting process, and that, we can talk about that. That's fairly involved.
Okay.
Madam Chair, could I follow up?
Sure, of course.
Yes, unless we can.
Thank you.
How much longer do you have?
Just a few more minutes
Can we,
and
Thank you. You mentioned the time.
Vice Chair Stone, go ahead and ask one question. And
Thank you.
Hold off till they're
Okay,
finished, because they just have a few more minutes.
Sure.
Otherwise,
okay,
we'll lose the contact.
thank you. You talked about that they can file the application to go down, and they have a year from that point to do it. But if they do, when they do go down, they have to give you give the agency 72 hours notice, and then have to give 3 hours notice once again.
that's correct.
Okay, but if a regulator doesn't come out within that 72 hours or 3 hours of that notice, can they still proceed to drill?
They can.
They can, thank you.
They can, yes. Very briefly, Jane showed you this slide. This is where things are happening. Essentially, it's in 3 or 4 fields is the preponderance of hydraulic fracturing in the state. Again, I'm going to just very briefly go over this. Jane touched on this topic, but I want to give you a little bit finer detail of the water used. Here are the data that we have received for the last year, so from the disclosure that we have, and let's do it in gallons. That's a unit that's more familiar to most people. The largest amount of water used in the well stimulation in this state is 2.5 million gallons. There's one well. The next well, the next highest, the largest amount of water is much closer to 1 million gallons of water. The average, round numbers, is around 100,000 gallons of water. Just to compare with what happens in the Marcellus in Pennsylvania, the Bakken in North Dakota, the Eagle Ford in Texas, those are several million gallons of water, just to give you some comparison. The low end is a few thousand gallons of water. The mean, which is the average, is around 92,000, 93,000. The median, which means there's many numbers as above as below, is around 80,000. The fact that the median and the mean are close to each other means that there's what we would call a normal bell-shaped curve, and so it's not a skewed distribution, greatly skewed. The point is that we use relatively modest amounts of water in comparison with the hydraulic fracturing that's done around elsewhere in the country, as Jane has, as the science study report already mentioned. I want to briefly mention the draft environmental impact report, which is ongoing, and as Mark mentioned, is out for public comment right now. It's in compliance with appropriate regulations. It helps to inform regulatory agencies with authority over well stimulation what the potential impacts and concerns are. Identifies potential impacts, avoidance and mitigation strategies, and will facilitate ongoing discussion between the division and the agencies with which it collaborates on oversight of well stimulation activities. What's important to realize is that this is a programmatic EIR, so it considers the entire program statewide, and it covers what's the impact of this entire program on the state. It doesn't get down into specific projects. There will be additional CEQA review required for the projects as the conditions in the local area will have to be evaluated and adjudicated. But this looks at what are the potential impacts, how they might be avoided or mitigated at the full well stimulation in the state level. It also considers different possible paths forward. For example, if the state were not to allow hydraulic fracturing, if the state were only to allow hydraulic fracturing within existing oil and gas reservoirs and so forth. One of the most important conclusions about the EIR is that at the current state of review is that the conclusion is that the smallest environmental footprint is allowing hydraulic fracturing in the state with the SB4 regulations in place. You can say, how can that be? Well, if we didn't allow it, wouldn't that have a smaller environmental footprint? You have to understand that the oil that's not produced in the state would then have to be brought from someplace else. There are environmental consequences about bringing oil by rail, bringing oil by tanker, the potential spills, where that oil comes from, and so forth. The programmatic analysis is based around 6 study regions. These coincide with the 6 Dogger administrative districts. The reason for that is that the districts are set up around coherent sets of geologic conditions and so forth, and that are unique to the district, or at least specific to the district. The programmatic analysis of specific oil and gas fields will be evaluated. Wilmington oil and gas, Inglewood oil and gas, Sespe oil and gas, specifically avoiding Kern County because of the detailed environmental impact report that's going on in Kern County. So this is out for public review. There was a public hearing last night in Ventura. There's a public hearing tonight in Los Angeles, and that is, and the appropriate representatives have been notified of those hearings in advance. Here's the schedule. Public hearings will go on through March. There will then be a review of the comments received and an evaluation of those comments. And then the development of the final EIR in June and certification by July 1. I'm going to turn it back to Director Nekadam to talk about the MOA process, which I've been less involved in given my short time here and issues that I've been dealing with, and onward.
Thank you, Steve. I'll be very, very brief. As specified in SB4, it was recognized, as I mentioned earlier, that well stimulation and oil and gas development in general touches on many media, air, water, toxics, et cetera. We have now concluded, and we have now signed memoranda of understanding, memoranda of agreement with the State Water Resources Control Board and all regional boards, the California Air Resources Board, and 6 air districts in which hydraulic fracturing and other stimulation is likely to take place or is currently taking place. We have another memorandum of agreement with the Department of Recycling and Recovery for reasons that will become obvious as you begin to see the increased emphasis on recycling water in various forms. And the Department of Toxic Substance Control is in place. We do have another MOU with the Coastal Commission because many of the Wilmington and other developments are actually within the coastal zone. So where we are with the air boards is the air board in California has already signed the MOA. Some of the other air quality management districts have now been authorized to have their executive officers sign the MOA. So we are pretty much in place, and we're working on our permit flow process and workflow design. And we'll leave it there. We're happy to take any questions.
All right. Questions of either of these 2 gentlemen? Any questions? Senator Jackson, before I call on Senator Stone, I just wanted to point out that Ventura had a sort of a hearing, if you will, or took comments on the draft EIR. But I thought what was relevant, particularly to your district, there's a specific called out programmatic analysis of a few specific oil fields in in the draft EIR that's completed July 1st. One is of the Sespe oil and gas field in Ventura County. So I know we get between us many, many questions. So thank you for putting that one into the mix.
And you know, this is all a wonderful discussion about what we are now fracking. The question that I have is, how do we know, or do we have any idea where fracking may expand in the future? Because a lot of the comments are, well, it's all focused now pretty much in one area, but it begs the question, is that all that there's going to be? Or, you know, as permits, I know permits have been taken out in counties, and I know in Ventura County there have been a number, even if they haven't started yet. So the question is there any reason to believe that they won't start the fracking process, or won't start, you know, moving forward, trying to follow all the recommendations and requirements that you've set out? How do we know that that isn't likely? I would breathe easier, but, you know, I have a feeling that the future isn't necessarily that easy to read.
Right. Well, Dr. Long spoke to that topic a little bit. Predicting the future is tough, because what we know from other areas, like, for example, in the Marcellus Shale of Pennsylvania or the Bakken of North Dakota, what happens is that the companies work for a period of about a decade before they actually figure out the geology and figure out exactly how to do it. What makes California a little different is that unlike those areas where the geology is really quite predictable over long distances, the geology is not predictable over long distances in California. And that creates a lot of problems. It creates enormous cost in figuring out these different areas. So the last thing I'm going to do is make a prediction about the future. If I could, with any accuracy, I'd probably be doing something else. But I think it's fair to say that the Monterey Shale, I think, will continue to be a target. How much it gets developed will depend on a number of issues. One is how quickly the companies can figure out how to extract. First of all, if there are hydrocarbons there, because they may have migrated out already. Secondly, if there are hydrocarbons there, are they economic? Thirdly, if there are economic reserves there, can we get at them in a way that is worth doing? So I think whatever happens, Senator, it's going to unfold slowly. It's not like something's going to happen next year and all of a sudden we're going to see huge amounts of activity. This is going to move in a very methodical way, very slowly, over a period of the next 4 or 5 years.
Thank you.
All right. Senator Stone.
Thank you for a great presentation. I really appreciate it. And just to piggyback on the Senator's question about the geography, as we see this process become more successful and we reduce our energy dependence, I'm looking at your SB4 regulations that you went into great detail before, fracturing, during, and after, and it seems as though it's written in such a way that anywhere geographically in the state of California, they would have to comply with these regulations, and we would be protecting a lot of the issues that I think that Senator Jackson might be concerned about.
Absolutely. I mean, these regulations apply statewide.
Right.
So there's no place that somebody's going to try and put a well, and we're not going to know about it, and we're not going to regulate it.
Exactly. Not only that, but all these SB4 interagency memoranda of agreements, you've got many agencies that are looking over the shoulder of any potential drilling sites with, you know, obviously protecting groundwater and protecting the environment. In your reviews, especially with the EIR, were there any water samples tested anywhere in the state where this technique is being utilized that have shown any contamination to water wells anywhere that you're aware of?
I do not, I have not read the EIR. It's 1,200 pages, and so I don't know the answer to that. Jonathan, do you want to take that?
Yeah, John Bishop will be speaking next
Okay.
on water.
Okay.
Well, maybe you can incorporate that.
I think the
in your
answer to your
comments.
question is no, but I'm not 100% certain, and Jonathan would know better than
Okay, I
I.
look forward to that follow-up. And then just to reiterate what I think you said so far that I understand is that when we go into a well with the cement processes, that the integrity of that well has to be demonstrated to the inspectors. There's a modest amount of water used in comparison to other geographical regions in the United States. In fact, I'm told that the amount of water that is used statewide is equivalent to the amount that we use on one golf course in one particular year. So I'm happy to hear that we use less water than other geographical areas of the state. And what I think is also very compelling, especially in a state that kind of leads others with respect to being green and sensitive to the environment, that there's a smaller environmental impact by virtue of utilizing this technology versus as opposed to bringing all this oil in by truck or by rail. And the last thing I want to say, and to compliment you, is that the oversight with not only the inspection process, the 72 hours, the 3-hour notices, but the comprehensive oversight by all these various regulatory commissions and agencies, I think is very well demonstrated.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.